snapping your fingers and dancing a bit. Welcome. You are in the right place at the right time. My name is Ashley Singleton, and I am a senior project manager with the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Child, Youth, and Family Mental Health, or NTAC for short. Welcome to the Stronger We, Building Stronger Support, Alignment, and Impact for Systems of Care training. We love to see where you all are zooming in from. I am zooming in from Atlanta, Georgia. Maybe drop it in the chat. Let us know where you're zooming in from. If you are on the path of Tropical Storm Helene, we are sending really safety feelings, positive vibes out for you and your family and loved ones. We hope that you are safe and well. And welcome again. Today, we'll be exploring strategic communications as a tool to drive change. Y'all, strategic communications is more than just creating, pretty logos and catchy messages. Those things are great. But in systems of care, implementing strategic communications plan means the difference between sustaining your SOC efforts or not achieving system transformation you spent so much time working on. Strategic communications means being intentional about how we frame messages, tell stories, and engage in meaningful conversations with mental health partners, as well as the general public. Whether it's discussing families' mental health needs with the school district, advocating for policy change at the state level, or building support for new programs in your community, strategic and meaningful communication is key to success. And at the heart of the training is the idea of effective communication. It's not just about sharing information, it's about creating connections, building trust, and inspiring action. So over the next 90 minutes, you're going to gain tips and tools that you can immediately apply. And our goal is to empower you to use communications to drive measurable change within your system of care. Before we do that, I got a couple of things I got to go over with you really quickly, and then I'll be out of your way. As a first really quick disclaimer, the presentation was prepared for NTAC under a cooperative agreement from SAMHSA. While supported by SAMHSA, the content does not necessarily reflect the official views or those of SAMHSA or HHS or the US government. On the next slide, there's some information about security issues. If there are security issues, knock on wood, there will not be. But if there are, the session will end immediately and we'll notify you via email on how you can reconnect with us. Next up, if you have any questions during the session, please, we're asking kindly to please use the Q&A feature in Zoom rather than the chat. There's already almost 300 people in the room, so it's really hard to keep up with questions in the chat. So use the Q&A. It's found in the bottom toolbar under the More menu. If it's not visible, click on that More button, you'll see it there. We want to thank all of our partners for their expertise in creating products and resources and learning opportunities. On the next slide, you'll see there's a full list of our no-cost learning opportunities. As you can see, we offer podcasts, individual consultations, learning exchanges. The list goes on, y'all, all at no cost to you. So we invite you to stay connected with us throughout the year and make sure you're on our distribution list and check our events page regularly so you don't miss out. Next up, there's some information about our System of Care Summit. If you've ever attended any of our previous System of Care Summits, can you put a heart in the chat? I love to see your hearts. We are currently accepting proposals for the 2025 System of Care Summit. I see those hearts. Lots of people here have come to the summit. So if you're interested in participating and being a speaker at the summit, submit a proposal by October the 4th. It's a great chance to share the insights that you have with the broader community. Next up, a couple of notes. We will not be providing a copy of today's slide deck. Again, we will not provide a copy of today's slide deck. However, you will receive access to the recordings of this session, and there's a guidebook that accompanies today's training. Also, we're offering 1.5 no-cost CEUs. You must complete the post-evaluation survey, which is going to be shared at the end of this training session. Once you complete that survey, you'll be redirected to a CEU request form where you can make that request. Okay, so just a second ago, I mentioned the guidebook. I know that many of you have already seen it. It's been open already over 5,000 times in 1 week. So I'm sure many of you have seen it. The guidebook is designed as a practical resource filled with tools, strategies, and examples to help you apply today's learning. It was put together by Dr. T, our trainer today, and her amazing and incredible team and staff. So post it on social media. Use it to prep for your team meetings. It's yours to use as a roadmap to drive real change in your communities. All right, without further ado, I want to introduce to you all Dr. Tiffany Manuel, lovingly known as Dr. T, the founder and CEO of The Casemate. Dr. T works with change makers across the United States to build stronger, more inclusive communities. With over 25 years of experience and strategic communications, she helps leaders grow public will and drive impact through powerful messaging. You can read her full bio in the guidebook. There's lots more there to learn about all the incredible work that she does. And I want to just invite you all to give her a warm welcome in the chat. Feel free to drop some hearts, some fires, whatever your favorite emoji is. Let's welcome Dr. T. Dr. T, the mic's all yours.
Thank you, Ashley. That was fantastic. I'm so excited to be joining our partners at Intact. And so excited for the folks who have been thoughtful about funding this. I know Samson and other folks, see the value of the work of systems of care all across the country and are trying to give it as much capacity as possible to do the amazing work that has to get done in every single community across these here United States. And I'm happy to bring the power really of the Casemate team to bear on this conversation. So I'm going to be leading this conversation, and my colleague Samara Crawford Herrera is also going to be in the chat. And maybe if we have some time at the end for questions, we'll be coming on to talk a little bit about some of the questions that y'all have in the chat. We want to be able to answer as many as we can. I'm going to jump right in because we have a lot of content. We want to make sure we get as much packed into the next couple minutes that we have. So I want to welcome you fully to the space. We're going to be talking about this conversation around a stronger we, like how we get more folks in the room, how we get more champions to champion the work of our systems of care, and just to be thoughtful, I think, fully resourced, actualized partners in the important work that we need to get done. And it's tough. Y'all know this. It's tough, right? To get not only to get folks to pull up to the table to do the work, but then to get them to show up to do the work, right? To link arms with you in alignment over the long term. So this is a conversation about how you begin to do that or how you strengthen the work that you're already doing right in that space. So before we get started, I just want to give a little bit of a background on myself. At the Casemate, a lot of what we do, quite frankly, is really focused on building public and political will, which is how do you get more champions? How do you get folks to understand the tough stuff when we're talking about health justice or community, or when we're talking about disparities that are happening in community that we want to get up and over and solve, or any number of things. A lot of what I spend my time doing and what my team spends their time doing is helping folks at the community level to figure out exactly some of the questions that we're going to be talking about today. How do you engage people in a way that gets them excited, enthusiastic to work with you, and to do that over the long term? And I would say this is probably one of the most important issues of our time that we don't spend enough time doing, quite frankly. A lot of our time is spent thinking about, right, the specifics of the work that we have to get done, which is probably right. But we also need to spend some time thinking about, like, what's our engagement strategy? What's a trust walk look like for us and our community partners? How do we asset frame those conversations? How do we make sure that we're building a bigger story of us? How do we figure out, right, how to talk people back into their power when they've been disenfranchised or they've been talked out of it for any number of reasons or any number of issues? So we're going to get to that today, right, as part of our conversation. So just a couple of things as we're starting our process together. I want to think of this from our vantage point at Casemate. This is a skill building exercise, right? The same way you, right, work up to hiking, or for some of you doing the exercise or whatever it is, there are a couple things we want to be able to do. So one, I want you to just in your mind set the intention that I'm going to lean forward in aspiration, and the aspiration of my system of care, thinking about the best and highest opportunities to advance the work of that system of care. And right, there's some skill building. So what the intention is to do some learning here today. The second is I want you to be thoughtful about just understanding the sort of perspective about what does it take to build a strong strategic case or to make a strong case for what a system of care does and what it's supposed to do to folks who may not always know that information. And then lastly, we're going to do some real skill building. Like, so what are the skills that I need to have in terms of professional development that would help my partners and community lean forward? So before we get there, I want you to take just a second because we want to make sure that as we think about the work, we're understanding the moment that we're in. There's just so much happening in the world today. Oh boy. I don't have to tell you how interesting, challenging, and wonderful. Let's just call it wonderful. All the differences of opinion, the sort of political stuff, the economic stuff. Folks are, influencers on every part of our communities having perspectives and right. How do you harmonize some of that so that you actually get the work done? And I want to just first of all just start with an affirmative statement that says we can do this, folks. We can build bridges of understanding that are strong enough to carry the work that we need to get done into the future, but we got to get the skill set right to be able to do that. That's not to say that there aren't challenges, but this can be done. And I want you to start with that intention. I remember I talked about that intention at the very beginning. The intention is, right, how do we get that done? So let's talk about that. Maya Angelou, some of you know, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner, award-winning writer, just a sort of person extraordinaire in terms of her writing capabilities, but also just in terms of her understanding and wisdom about engaging people. And one of the things that she said many, many moons ago was she said, I've learned that people will sometimes forget what you said. I've learned that people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so, to Ashley's point earlier in her introduction, when she was talking about communications and engagement of folks, sometimes we focus on the wrong thing. We focus on did I get the words exactly right? Or did I do all the things right that I'm supposed to do? Some of those may not always line up in the way that we would like them to in terms of how we engage folks around our system of care work, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And the work that we have to do is as much about what we're saying, what we're doing, as much as it is about how you make people feel. So we're going to talk about that today. The first thing about this is it is about the way that you bring people together that matters. It's not just the words, it's not just the deeds, it's the way you bring them together. The second thing is, listen, folks, there is no way around it. We need to make a stronger case for why the systems of care that we have in our communities matter and what they bring to the table, which is why we're having this conversation about strategic case making today. And the last thing I think I want to say is this is energy work, right? It's about the energy. We know from a lot of good social science. It's funny because people always, when the communications are like, oh, you got to say it like this. The thing about it is most of the sort of communications that we do are really nonverbal, right? It's the stuff that the way that it's the energy that you bring people in on, right? And how you change the energy in the room is really the goal of some of the work we're going to talk about today. So I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get started and talk about what that is. So let's do that. And thank you. I want to say thank you all for downloading the guide. There was a little bit of an introduction to this conversation. And what you'll find is the desire in that guide to do a couple things to really root us in aspiration, right? Thinking about how we are supporting people in their highest aspirations for their communities, right? Two, thinking about how we talk about systems and share stories that are visionary about systems, which are not always easy. So we're going to talk about that. Three, we're going to talk about solutions, right? People want to hear about solutions. They're tired of talking about problems. And listen, if you got problems, nobody wants to hear about it because everybody I know has 1,000 problems. What they want are to hear about solutions. What's working? How can we lean into those kinds of things? How do we invest in, bring those to the forefront? And then finally, right, we got to have a what we call it, the case made a justice roadmap that is based in transparency, trust, and equity. So all those kinds of things are built into and into the guide. You can find that there, but I'm going to talk through some of the specific pieces and hopefully bring some of that to life in a little bit of a different way than you might have be able to get from just reading the document. All right, folks. So there are three major tips we go through in the guide. The first tip for the way that we need to talk about this stuff is we got to position children and families as heroes, right? In the conversations that we're having, not as folks with problems, not as folks that are troubled, not as folks who are vulnerable, but folks who are heroes, right? And we'll talk about that in just a second. But we got to also bring them in as decision makers, right? In the work that we're trying to get done, elevating their highest aspirations for themselves, for their families, their communities. And so there are a couple different ways we do that. And I would say there's some skill building that we're going to have to do here. So walk with me through a couple of things. I'm going to talk about three skills, right, that help you do that. When I talked about the energy, how do we change the energy in the conversation? There's skills, three skills we're going to talk about: asset-based framing, we're going to talk a little bit about appreciative inquiry, and a little bit about mirroring. And we won't have a chance to go very deeply into each one of those, but I want to introduce those. When I talk about, I'm going to talk about each one of them in a practical way. So I hope they kind of stick, that they're sticky enough that they stick with you, even if we don't do a formal full session on each one of those today. And I want to just point out that in the actual guidebook, in addition to pointing out some of those skill sets, there are reflection questions. So if you want to dig deeper and think about how you take some of this information and root it in your work and your systems of care tomorrow. Like, what are you going to do at your desk tomorrow? There are some questions in each one of the guide, the tips that help you do that. So let's talk about each one of these skill sets that y'all are so interested in building. So let's talk about the asset-based framing, appreciative inquiry, and mirroring. So the first thing is asset-based framing. We could talk about so many different issues that are troubling our communities, and we can talk about those issues as problems, challenges, vulnerabilities, disparities. All of those are negatively framed. If you did that, it would certainly be true. We're talking about all those things. But the way that lands on folks, right, is so negative. And you got to think about the world that we live in today. So much around us is so negative. Almost everything you see on the news, is so negative, right? The conversations even that folks are having are baked into their anxieties, their anxiousness about the world that's happening around us, the politics, the economics, etc. So the worst thing we can do and the worst thing we could do is to be a wreck on a wreck. I always say is to be a wreck on a wreck. When people are feeling anxious and they have anxiety and they're in that moment of fear, the worst thing we could do is then lump on them a whole set of problems, whether we're talking about our systems of care or the families that we serve as part of that system of care. So our ability to bring people in as heroes, right? This is just one example in Los Angeles. Many of you may do this in your system of care already. If you don't, you should, right? Have opportunities for people to meet people where they want to be, not always where they are. They may not always be the heroes that we want them to, and the role models that we want yet, but they can be. And our ability to see folks, right, in their aspiration is so important. I would say think about your own, for many of you who have, particularly those of you who have children already, think about their aspiration when you bring kids in and their aspiration, what that does for them, right? Any teacher, any person who's ever been a teacher, for example, will tell you, you never come into a classroom and say, "Oh, you kids, man, y'all not doing anything. Y'all not doing your homework. I don't know what y'all gonna be in life. I don't know what to do." Right? Said no teacher ever. Not said no good teacher ever. Good teacher comes in and says, "Man, I'm so excited right now. I know many of y'all are still trying to figure out this homework thing or trying to figure out these sessions, but I promise you, right, if you get this right, there are all these wonderful things that are gonna happen. I'm gonna make sure that you get some extra free time at the end of the classroom. I'm gonna make sure you get some candy or cookies. I'm gonna make sure you get whatever it is, right, that kids are so excited about, right? You bringing them in on kind of that, not only just on their aspirations, but asset framing. What do we have that's an asset that you all represent, and meeting them there? And the same can be true of your systems of care, where there are other professionals in the community. You're bringing folks in as heroes. You are the heroes, right, to people in this community. You may not always be recognized in that way, but we want to take the time to recognize you and such because it's important to the work that we have to get done together. So taking the time to do that, thinking about in your system of care, how do we recognize folks, not always so much where they are, but where we want them and need them to be, and understand that they can live into that, right, if they're given enough of a runway to do that. And I want to say one more thing about this too. And you all know, for a lot of the work that many of you probably do, oftentimes we are meeting individual families or individual folks, maybe even kids, at the lowest point in their lives. We're meeting them at some of them at the worst moments in their lives. We're meeting them in the space where it's just tough, right? Again, you don't want to be a wreck on a wreck. You don't want to be meeting folks at possibly the most challenging part of their life and then be right repeating that to them. You want to be saying, I know what your aspiration is, right? And I'm excited that you're living into that, to give folks just that opportunity to hope that there's something better on the other side of the conversations that we may be having with those families and kids. And I realize that not all of the work that we do in our system of care is child focused, right? Not all of the work that we do is focused on even parents, but the same kinds of sort of nurturing around who are our heroes and how do we bring people in on their aspirations can be applied to any number of stakeholders or partners that we're serving in our systems of care. So the second one is the second skills that we're going to learn about is just appreciative inquiry. And I realize there's not a lot of words on the page. Let me just talk about what that is. Appreciative inquiry is the idea that you ask questions of people that are meant for them to appreciate, right, where we are and what we have. It's another way of thinking about asset framing or asset-based framing. When you're bringing folks in, where you're asking people, for example, what is it that they love about their community? Because we get asked a lot of questions about what's wrong in the community and what's not happening and what don't you have, and all the questions that people are used to answering. But when you ask people about what they love about the community, what they hope and aspire for it in 15 years or 10 years or 5 years from now, what would you hope this community looks like, feels like, believes, breathes, is able to do? What you see on the screen is something that came out of some work that we did at the Case Made around healthcare and thriving, and a community folks were just talking about what their aspirations. Like at my age, I just want my grandkids to be able to live close to me like my grandparents did, or I just want to be able to take my kids to the doctor and not have to get a big bill that comes after it just because like even if there's nothing wrong, or I don't want to see all these crazy election ads that are so negative, or I just want a chance to retire and spend time with my neighbors and go fishing and like watch kids run around the playground, or somebody else said I want to dance. Like I don't know what my life holds, but I want to dance well into my 80s. Like I want to go walking trails. Like these are the larger aspirations of folks. I want to say to you that the reason you bring people in, right, by asking those kind of questions, it changes the nature of the conversation that you can have after that. Because y'all are asking folks to do some pretty big things as part of your system of care. And when you bring people in by appreciating kind of what it is they hope for, what it is they want, it changes the energy. People are much more receptive to the ask that you have afterward if they've been asked about something really like important. I have to say, I do this with my sons, right? This is just an impersonal, normal way to think about it. I have two teenage sons that have to get up pretty early. I live in Florida, and their high school started super early. I don't know why we have done this to our children, but anyway, they have to get up at 5:30 in the morning to get up and get themselves ready for school. And so that means basically the mom has to get up and do like this mom, right, is getting up and trying to get them up, and they don't want to get up, and they're teenagers, and just all the things, right? One of the things I do to get my kids up and ready to go and ready for the day they're going to have is I start to ask them questions about something that they're excited about. At 5:30 in the morning, I'm going in their room like, "Good morning, what's going on?" And my youngest son, I'm asking him about soccer. Hey, you got that? Hey, you know what? You got that soccer. You got soccer practice today, right? Oh yeah, you got soccer practice today. Yeah, and you know what? I was looking at that last goal you made in the last game. You know what? I was thinking that you should have flinked from the other side. And I will say that my younger son, who is involved in soccer, he doesn't want to be up that early, but there's something about having a conversation about the thing that he's interested in that perks him up. The same thing, my older son, he's an orchestra guy. He wants to do orchestra and he loves looking about the stars. So I ask him something about that because it wakes up his brain on the thing that he's interested in, right? It's just a question, right? I don't have a whole lot to say, but the energy that you bring people into your conversations and makes all the difference. So for your systems of care, you want to think about the aspirations of the people in the room that you're bringing in, whether it's the local health center and whether it's the mental health folks or whether it's the transportation folks. What's the aspiration that they're bringing into that room, personal and professional? And you're asking them the kind of questions, right, that get them excited about being in the space that you're asking them to do. Now, this kind of exercise should lead you to the third skill set. So the second skill set is appreciative inquiry, asking the kind of questions that get people excited. The third set of that is now you're going to turn all those individualized aspirations into a bigger statement of we, right? So you want to collapse that down, and it doesn't help you like to put out something that's just like, all those individual statements. You want to collapse that down into something like this. So this is what we did for that particular group of folks who are coming together around their own system of care. We said something like, no matter where you come from or what part of this community you live in, we all want to experience joy, to raise our families in a place that's thriving, and to have one that offers hope at our future, right? That we think is bright. We always want to feel connected to the resources for well-being that help us to get through some tough times, and also to feel entitled to experience the best of what our nation or our community offers. We all want to be listened to have our voices matter, to do meaningful work that pays, and to swing big at the possibilities of life. Even as we age, we want to experience wonder and possibility. We want to enjoy nature. We want to dance. We want to laugh. We want to bike. We want to play together. We want our friends and neighbors, even those who we haven't met yet, to show up for us when times are hard, and to keep a watchful eye over the younger folks and the older folks among us. And we want to feel welcomed in our communities, regardless of our racial or ethnic background, regardless of our country of origin, regardless of our points of view or other parts of our rich, diverse backgrounds. To build the world of our dreams and to captain our shared future, we have to work together in spite of our differences that can sometimes make us retreat to our separate corners of this county. We want to do that because whether we like it or not, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, our fates are inextricably connected with everything and everybody around us, the people, the businesses, the institutions, the natural environment around us. All of it is connected. That's why our system of care must include everybody, and that's what we're inviting you to. So you can see at the very top of that all those individualized statements about wanting to dance, bike, laugh, play together, retire, blah, 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 blah. All that gets collapsed down into a statement of we that allows folks to see themselves in it, right, in different parts of it, but brings it all the way back to our system of care. That's a part of that statement of we. So I'm going to say, just rounding out that first tip, right? The bigger reflection that I hope you'll take away from those skills, the skills of asset framing, the skills of appreciative inquiry, the skill set, right, of mirroring back to people what they've shared with you in a thoughtful, right, statement, is what motivates people to do the hard work. You're asking them to do some big system change. You're asking them to move around their services. You're asking them to move around, right, how they work, right, internal to their own organizations and how they work together. You're asking them sometimes to serve populations they wouldn't otherwise serve. You're asking them to get out of their, right, the way that they've come to do things. Sometimes you're asking them for more resources. And so what motivates people is not these pleas of like, please, you got to do more. Like, what motivates folks is not the like, oh my God, the world is caving in, and no kid will ever eat again in this county, although some of those dire predictions may in fact come true. What motivates people is fundamentally about their own aspirations, especially for their own lives. And to the extent that you can connect to that, you get people to lean in a whole different way. So I'm going to go on to tip 2, but as I'm doing that, I hope that folks will just put in the chat some of the ways that y'all are asset framing your conversations. Put in the chat a little bit about the kinds of appreciative questions that you're asking of people, right? That appreciates their aspirations. And put in the chat some of the ways you've been able to mirror back to your partners, right? The larger aspirations for your work. Put that in the chat. We'd love to just start a chat happening so folks get some examples of that. All right, so let's go to tip 2. We're going to go to the 3 skill sets there. On skills tip, in tip 2, we ask you to tell visionary, future-oriented stories about the systems that y'all are maintaining, right? And y'all are transforming, right? And so to do that, you need to be able to pace people into the future. You need to have people understand systems or systems thinking. And that's a hard one because not everybody gets systems. They get charity, but they don't always know that there's a system, right, that is working, that is supporting them, right, underneath that sort of charity minded kind of work. And then you got to be able to tell a bigger story of us. And of course, in tip 2 in the book, in the guidebook, there's some other reflective questions that you all are welcome to share, or welcome to look at, that will give you some things to think about as you move forward. So let's talk about story of us, a little bit of story of us, and a little bit of I would say future pacing. So I love this by Nelson Mandela, who once said, our children are the rock on what the future is built, our greatest asset as a nation. They will be the leaders of our country, the creators of our national wealth, those who care for and protect our people. And so again, having people think about the future that they want, pacing them into that future. And I would say many of you probably are pretty good future pacers. You gotta be helping your folks in your care system of care. Think 10 years down there. Listen, folks, you gotta say something like 10 years from now, we don't want to be doing the same work. We want to be pacing ourselves out of business and on to the next productive thing that we can do in this community, because we have solved for some of the cracks or some of the gaps, right, in our county or in our city that just don't make any sense anymore. So if we want to get to the point where we're pacing ourselves out of business, literally, and moving on to other creative things we might be able to do, what does it take to get there today, right? So that kind of future pacing within your story of we is super important. I want to say systems are, so the next part of the sort of skill set is to get people to think in terms of systems, and not just the folks in the system of care, but average everyday folks who don't know very much about, right, what you all do. They don't see systems, right? They see individual families in Christ, or they see individual people that need to be helped, or they see they may even see organizations that may be part of your systems of care that need some support, but they don't see that as a broader way that y'all are functioning together to provide the kind of support that folks need. So sometimes one of the easiest ways that you can get people to think about systems is to use a metaphor that they understand, right? And I'm talking, it's just average everyday folks. People should not need a PhD to understand what a system of care is. And unfortunately, sometimes the way we talk about it, they do. So this is just one idea, and you guys can get super creative on what metaphor you use. You can use a garden metaphor. You can use any kind of metaphor, right? That just describes the essential way that you want people to think about your system of care. This is just one example, right? That we've seen work in other places. So talking about a system of care is kind of like your early warning system, right? Or early warning, right? Your the lights that come on in your car, right? You can say something like this: having a strong system of care in our county is like having an early warning system, because it tells us when we need to head to the mechanic and what kind of service we might need when we get there. And here's the thing: nobody really likes to see a warning light come on in their car, and they certainly don't want to see the bill that usually comes after it. But the thing about it is, we all recognize why you need it, because the last thing you want to do, right? And you can say, is be stranded, right? Trying to get somewhere. Mechanics do an assessment of your car, and if there are issues, right, they figure out what you need, and they have the best chance of, like, they give you the best chance of avoiding some of those roadside emergencies. Nobody wants to be stranded any other kind of way, right, on the side of the road. And so that's why we need that. So you can say our system of care in this county kind of functions like that warning system. It gives us a way to know when things are not going well for families or for individuals in this community, the tools that we need to see where the problems are, and also to brainstorm together about how we solve them, as well as to make sure that we're bringing the best of our collective skills, right, to help them solve those challenges. And here's the thing: when we fail to heed the early warning lights on our well-being, we fail to give our county the best opportunity to see our families thrive, to connect them to resources for well-being, and to give everybody better prospects for a strong and healthy community. That's why we need a system of care. And then you can talk about all the specific things that your community of care does. But the point of this is, when you do something like this, even folks who don't know anything about all the different, right, organizations and the policies and the practices and the resource flows and the relationships and the power dynamics and they don't have to know any of that. When they think about a system care, they go, oh yeah, I remember. It's like the early warning system. Yeah, like the lights in my car, right? And then they can even be generative about why that's important. So you get people having a conversation about your quote unquote system of care that they would never have been able to make without you handing them a metaphor that gives them an everyday way to talk about it. So, so that's one way to get people thinking about your systems, to get people in systems thinking. Another way that we often use in the communications tools that we use at the Case Made is we often ask people to describe what they do in terms of two tomorrows, right? So there are two tomorrows. We can continue to do it the old way, right? And you can list out all the things that would happen without a strong, coordinated, thoughtful, aligned system of care, right? The old way, of families are isolated, they're disconnected from, right, the system that works for them. It's not designed by community or for the community. It doesn't speak for the aspirations of community. It doesn't have we can continue to go down that road that, right, all day long. We have a set of organizations that are working. We can continue to do that, or we can figure out how to build a strong system and, right, a system of care in place. And that means we connect the dots on the resources in this community so that we ensure that none of those resources go to waste. Don't y'all hate that when when people are like talking about something like, wouldn't it be nice if we had this? And you're like, do you know how many resources we've tried to put out in this community that just go to waste because people don't know what they are. Well, when we start to connect the dots, right, together, fewer of those resources go to waste. More families, more individuals, more organizations get to use those wisely, right, in the way that they were intended. A system of care is designed in collaboration with community. It allows us to offer more culturally competent resources. It means building strong partnerships that allow us to serve more families and to do so more impactfully, helps us to pool some resources, get more effective, right? Set really transparent and measurable goals. That's the direction I would like to go. But if you think we ought to continue the old way, right, where families are isolated, it's patchwork, temporary fixes, doesn't do very much, then we can do that. But we got 2 tomorrows. Which pathway would you like us to pursue? I'm waiting. I'll wait. And then right, so you give people like a real, then what this does is helps them to understand the difference between what the steady state of status quo today versus what you all provide. Being able to show that, like, oh, right. Oh, yeah, I got that. Right. So having that is super duper important. So that's again another way of getting people into the understanding what systems do and why systems of care are so important. The final one I think I want to talk about on this one is just talking about just giving a statement, right, about linking individualized folks to the bigger system. I don't know that I'll go over this so much, but because I think probably many of you do something like this, just talk about the individual circumstances of a family and then connect it back to what a system of care actually does. So that this bigger story of us, there's not a soul on the planet who can say that they've never needed help in their at some point in their lives. It just doesn't exist. We all need a support system, right, to get us and help us up and over tough times. And so you can say every family is just one support system away from success. So we plan to be, right? We plan to be that support system. And you can talk about what that means. But again, building a bigger story of us, all of us, right, in this county, whatever it is, have needed these kind of resources. And now here it is, we're providing those. So what I want to say, if you think about this second tip, right, here's the bigger reflection. It's the reflection that people are super optimistic, right? When the prospects are changed, when we pace them into the future. So talking about this future focused systems work that we're doing is super duper important. And so when you think about your work, how are you pacing them into the future? Like 5 years from now, we want to be in a whole different place. We do not want to be having the same conversations 5 years from now. We want to be having a whole different set of issues, right? To talk about. I have some friends in St. Louis. They have started this campaign, which is wonderful, called Once and for All. If you haven't seen it, you should Google it. Once and for All. And they've got people to do like video, quote unquote, letters, right, to Lou, like St. Louis, right? And they're like, "Dear Lou, once and for all, I am so tired of hearing about, this disparities between racial groups and ethnic groups. I'm so tired of hearing about mental health. I'm tired of that. I once and for all, I just want to solve this. What does it take? I'm ready to go. I'm leaning forward with my organizational resource. I'm leaning forward as an individual, whatever it is. I am leaning forward because I don't want to have this conversation right in my future. That means we got to take care of this today. So those kind of future focused, future paced conversations around a support system is what gets people optimistic, right, about solving some of these issues. Okay, so the last tip we're going to talk about, and the three is that the last one is that we got to have a roadmap to justice here that has transparency built into it, trust, and that centers our conversations about equity. So there are three skill sets here I want us to lean into a little bit in terms of being able to do that. One is we got to think about what's our trust walk, because trust is at the core of all of this. If people do not trust you, people don't trust your organization, and people, even for those of us in government, people don't have a sense that they don't trust government in the way that sometimes people will talk about. It limits our ability to sort of support and help folks. So we have to often do a trust walk that helps people to lean into, right, understanding that we are worthy of their trust and that we now have a foundation for working together. The second thing is we know we got to center equity. That's a huge portion of the trust building that has to happen, and leveraging also our data for action. And once again, there are lots of the reflection questions that are in that guide, right, that talk about some of the things you can do to begin to exercise those skill sets. But I want to talk about each one specifically. So the first one is your trust walk. And I will say, there's nowhere around it. We got to tell the truth, right? That your system of care is going to move at the speed of the trust relationships that you've nurtured. If you don't have the trust of the community, and sometimes it's not about not having people like you or not having people think you're credible. They may think you're credible. They just may not trust you, for example, to solve the problems that they're working on. Or they might not trust you with their resources, or they might not trust you with their clients, right? Or their community. Like, I don't trust y'all to talk, right? Whatever that is, right? That our systems of care are really dependent on the nurturing of those relationships. So y'all know this. Hopefully I'm not preaching to the choir. Y'all got this. But often what when at the case made, when we work with people, we often ask people, number one, have you, what are the signs that this community trusts you? But two, and your system of care partners trust you. But the second thing is, what is your trust walk? Like, what have you done to make sure that you actually do not only have the ear, but you have the trust of the folks that you serve? And there are lots of ways you can do a trust walk. You can facilitate, often at the case may, we'll do community voice sessions with folks, and then we ask folks, really listen to what the community is telling you. Tell the truth about that, right? Don't pretend that you have resources that you don't, or you can solve issues you can't. You can say, listen, I can't solve all of that. I know we have a lot of things going on in this community. Can't solve all of that, but here's what I can do. Here's what's in my span of control or my influence to be able to do. And I'm going to show up and do that. And so that's the part of like being responsive. You all have asked for this. These are the things that I can do. These are things I can't. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to be responsible. And then deliver, right? Deliver on something that builds initial trust. When people see you show up and you've been able to deliver, you said, this system of care is going to take on this year. We're going to reduce the number of folks who are suffering from mental health issues related to blah, 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 because we've been able to institute this. And the community has asked for that. Deliver on that. We're going to show up. We're going to do it in this way. And again, tell the truth. If it's not something you can really deliver on, I can't solve that, but here's what I can do, right? That kind of work builds the trust. So when you go, when you think about your system of care, I want you to think about what's our trust walk? What does that look like? Where have we demonstrated, right, in with our, not only with our community partners or our folks who are in our organizational partners, but with this community, that we are folks to be trusted with their aspirations, with their strongest possibilities for change, with their desire for change in the future. What does that look like, and how have we delivered on that? Some of you are already working on things like that. If you are, put it in the chat. Let me hear, what's your trust walk look like? What are you doing, right, to really make sure that the folks in your system of care really do, right, show up, right, in the best possible way, trusting you and trusting the work that you can do together, right, as a system of care to advance the work. The second thing I want to say, in addition to your trust walk, I want you to certainly center equity. And I forgot I put the slide in here. This is the once and for all, folks. If you haven't looked at what they've done, it's really extraordinary. Is in St. Louis. But what I want to say again, when you are talking about equity, equity is a tough thing sometimes, because not everybody wants to have a conversation about equity, and you don't always have to name it as equity. And the reason I'm saying that is because I know in some parts of the country, in some communities, the word equity itself is a challenge, not because it's a bad word, but because folks thinks that telegraphs a particular, political persuasion. It doesn't, but folks have sort of politicized it to some extent. So you don't always have to use the words, but you can talk about equity, right? And what it means in terms of your system of care. This is just an example. You can say, while we value our diversity here in this community, we haven't always invested equally in everybody's success. We just haven't. And this is true, especially of communities of color or families of color, many of whom have been systematically locked out of the opportunities to grow and succeed. And that's as parents, as homeowners, as professionals, as students. And that has left them much more vulnerable to the precarity that leads to abuse and neglect. Or you can model this in any kind of ways. It doesn't always even have to be communities of, families of color. You can say, we haven't always invested, right, in everyone's success equally. When you look at, the families who may have a disabled loved one or who have mental health issues, right? We blocked opportunities for those families or for those individuals to really be able to lean in, to grow, right, and succeed, right, as all the things that we know they aspire to do. And that's left them more vulnerable, right, to all kinds of things that we can actually solve. So when we look at that, some people will just call that unfair, but particularly we're talking about families of color. They may call that just unfair. Some people may call it just discriminatory. It's just discrimination. People just, right? They have stereotypes and they use those stereotypes to make decisions, and it's wrong. And some may just call it racist. And you can say whatever you call it, is wrong and our future depends on solving it. And this is a way of getting at some of the tension that's often evoked when people call it different things, but you got to call it this, you got to call it. We don't have to call it anything. You can call it anything you want to, but at the end of the day, once and for all, we need to solve for it. Whatever it is. Let's figure it out. Let's solve for it. So, and again, the sort of call to action at the end is let's not leave, whole neighborhoods or whole groups of people or whole communities behind as our county prospers. Let's refuse to take the old legacy systems that were in place, systems that were built for a different time and that keep people in perpetual cycles of poverty. Let's not take those into our future together, right, as a group of professionals in this community. Let's figure out how to once and for all solve for some of these bigger issues. That means how we align our resources. That means how we show up with authenticity and trust and tell the truth. That means how we show up, right, looking for the families and communities and groups that are most in need and giving our best and all, right, in those particular ways first. It means like all the things that it means for your particular system of care. Here's what it means for us. But that preamble is super important, right? As you're trying to get people to center equity. And I want to say, I'm going to talk at the end about a session that I'm hosting just to talk a little bit more about these kind of equity focused questions, because often the way that we use our data to sort of talk about equity doesn't always line up with, right, what gets people motivated to do some of that, which is why the next skill set I want to talk about, the last one actually of our session today, is really to talk about how we use data to energize people, right? To focus on three things: either solution, a strength, or service, or a system, a strength, or solution. Why am I saying that? I'm saying because most of the data that we have, particularly talk about why our system of care needs more resources, is super hyper focused, right, on driving negative disparities focused data. And that is terribly, right, demoralizing for folks. Nobody wants to be, I would say, just look at the one on the left side of the screen. No parent wants to have their kid in an ad that looks like this. If I'm his mom on the left, I don't want my child in that. I'm not proud of that. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be in that story, quite frankly. I want to see my child in the one on the right, right, who's got power and capacity, and right, like we're still talking about the same data. The data is that suggests that about 11 million children are in poverty today. Both of them have really the same data, but they come at it from a very different standpoint. The data on the left disempowers folks. Nobody wants to be in the story. It's a story that's incredibly negative. It doesn't even really it in some ways, shape, or form. It tries to get at systems, but not really, right? But it leaves people in a very different place than they would be when they look at what's on the right. The right one talks about solutions, what our strengths, what we gain by investing in the capacity of our young people. And then you can talk underneath that about what your system of care actually does to actually invest in the power and capacity of our kids. What are we doing, right, to eradicate that? It's very solutions focused rather than the one on the left, which again is all problem centric. So again, how we use our data. If you I think that what I want you to do is to take the top of this, and no matter what data you're about to put out as part of your system of care, or even as part of your organizations, if you look at that data and it's not hyper focused on solutions, it doesn't name a strength, or it doesn't name the system. Listen, folks, right, you're not using data, right, leveraging it to energize people, not just that your residents in your community, but the folks actually in your system of care, right, to do the kind of work that needs to get done. We'll probably have lots of questions about this in the chat, but I'd love to have people sort of think about how you turn the data that you have, which is mostly negative and mostly disparity focused, into data that really talks about solutions, strengths, and systems. Here's another example, one on the left. They were trying to talk about sort of mental health issues and how trying to get people to recognize, right, when kids are lethargic, when they're not, that something is wrong and that needs to right, you need to intervene. The sentiment is probably important. You need to look at their faces. You need to kind of pay attention to what's happening with kids. But as you see on the left, that is an awful way to do it. You do not take a young woman of color and put her face on the side of a bus and then put a whole bunch of negative stuff on her face. Same is true for the other one, by the way. That don't Please don't do that. Please don't do that. What they really wanted to say in this ad, they were talking about 437 kids in their county who have need support, right, in their mental health pipeline for a whole range of reasons. Instead of saying that, no, right, do a different kind of ad that says we're looking at the bright futures, right? 437 bright futures are sitting right in front of us, and we need to be dialed in to their faces to see their potential and to help shape their resilience. What does it take for our system of care to be able to ensure that those 437 young people get to live into a bright future? And here's what our system of care is doing to make sure that happens. That's a very different conversation than a conversation that puts, right, that attaches problems, right, especially to young people and especially to young people of color. I hope I don't need to explain why that's problematic. Um, so those are examples of some of that data focus. And the last, I would say, reflection on that, reflection on that piece for those folks who are, for last folks who are interested, is that we have to be at that, ensuring that there's a clear pathway to success kind of, helps us reinforce the focus on equity, builds trust, and also strengthens our we. But taken together, when you use that data to talk about why you're going to be successful or what you're working on, and use that data for strength buildings, for solutions, you get a very different conversation about what their system of care partners can do together. So I want to, so let's go to the sort of final. So when you get into that, each one of those tips, right? There are three kind of, I think, professional development tips that are deeply sort of embedded in the work that y'all are, that we've talked about today as part of tip one, positioning our young people and our families as decision makers, as heroes, leads into our skill sets around asset-based framing, asking the kind of questions that get people excited about the world we live in and what they can do, right? Leverages our strengths rather than our weaknesses. And then mirroring back people's aspirations to them is the way to get people to, right, to get optimistic and to be part of our system of care. On the second tip, right, being super visionary and future focused, right, particularly about systems, gets people excited about helping to do the work that y'all need them to do. Pace them into the future. Give them ways to describe the systems thinking that you need them to have, and then wrap that around a bigger story of us. We all need to be involved. There's not a person on the planet, or not a person in this entire county that hasn't needed somebody to help at some point. We are that help for however many people y'all are serving as part of all the organizations that are at that system of care. And then that third tip, you want to build that roadmap for justice, really focus on your trust building, get that trust walk. What is the trust walk that we need to be leaning into? Or what does our trust walk look like? Second, how are we centering equity as part of these conversations, right? And doing that effectively, even if whether we use the word equity or race, doesn't matter. The issue is that we're doing the work that serves and centers equity as part of our work. And then finally, how are we leveraging that data for action? Okay, so I want to say there's lots of I'm gonna actually come back to that slide in just a second because I think we're gonna have some discussion potentially in the chat, and some hopefully folks are putting lots of interesting questions in the chat that we can go forward on some of those. But I want to say that there are a couple things that I hope folks will avail themselves of as resources as they come. One is that we have a free newsletter that folks can get all those kind of tips about some of those some of that skill-based learning and some of those things. If you have the opportunity, you can snap that QR code, which will get you right into our newsletter. I'm going to come back to that in just a couple minutes. There is a free webinar. If you go to our website, you can register for a webinar where we're going to be talking about, I left off in that centering sort of equity conversation at the very end. And somebody say, well, if you don't say the word equity, don't say the word race, how do we get a different kind of race consciousness or equity consciousness? Totally agree. We're going to be, there's a free webinar that I'm leading next Thursday, actually, to talk more specifically about how you get people on what I call the racial justice runway. So for those folks who want to engage in that, I hope you will avail yourself of that. And then I would say, really not only if you downloaded the guide, I think they said there are about 5,000 folks who've done that. Take that guide, share it with folks. When you get the recording from the session, share it with folks, and then begin to have those discussions about the kinds of skills your team, your community of care would need to have in order to bring people forward in a very thoughtful way. And I think at this point, I am going to turn it back over to, I think it's Ashley. Is that right?
Yeah, hey there, Dr. T. Woo, I mean, amazing, awesome. I don't even know what other adjective to use. Just great. We have time for questions. So I know we've asked folks to use the Q&A. to leave questions for Dr. T. So I want to invite you to please type your questions. If you don't see the Q&A little question mark in your toolbar, you click on the More button, and then you should see on that list there Q&A where you can put questions there. If you don't see it there, go ahead and drop it in the chat. That works too. We'll keep an eye out. We got plenty of folks here in the room that can keep an eye on the chat to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah.
So the floor is open for questions. So we are not sharing the slides, but you will receive a recording. And of course, you have access to the guidebook. So you can use both of those resources. What other questions do we have from folks?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this says, Dr. T, so many of us facilitate virtual spaces now. What tools and tips do you recommend for putting these tips into action in virtual spaces?
So I would say it's so funny you say that. I would say almost all of these tips are as practical in person as they are in virtual spaces. And the good thing, I think, over if there's anything that came out of the pandemic that I think that has been helpful for us is it is having to also exist and to find ways of transitioning or communicating with folks effectively via Zoom presentation, all kinds of, electronic and digital ways. I think people have gotten a lot more savvy about how to do that. And the same kind of issues kind of happen, right, in electronically or digitally as they can happen in person. So for example, with many of you are hosting meetings, right, that are hosting some of your systems of care meetings virtually versus in person, the same thing, bringing people in, right, on, in a way that really helps to get them inspired to be there. Changing the energy of that conversation is important. You notice when y'all came in, we brought you all in on music. There's a reason you want to do that, because it loosens folks up. They're like, oh, wait a minute, I thought this was a formal meeting. And also in the middle of a day, right, when you've been having back-to-back Zooming, to be brought in on something that just allows that the sort of stress response system in your body to just relax because you've gotten some music. Even just a little bit of that, right, kind of helps the conversation go better when you do that. So bringing some of that intentional focus, even if it's kind of digital spaces or electronic spaces, is super important. And I would say, think about that, right? For every single, and then maybe even challenge yourself for every single one of the groups that you're in, for every single meeting that you have with your system of care. How do we asset frame every single thing in this conversation? How do we do that? Like sometimes I'm like, I am not going to let any moment go down in this meeting where folks go down the rabbit hole of negativity, right? Because there's too much opportunity, right, in this moment to allow ourselves, right, to be demoralized by what's happening. We have to stay, right, mindful of what's possible, and part of the way to do that is to asset frame this conversation. Every negative thing you're thinking, right, can be translated so that it speaks to the opportunity in the moment. And it's your ability, it's your skill set in being able to do that may actually determine how effective that system of care, not just the meeting, but how effective that system of care actually is in moving forward. Because who wants to come to a meeting where it's depressing? It's like, I used to go to those meetings, but every time I came out of those meetings, I was so depressed. I was more depressed when I came out of the meeting than when I went in the meeting. Your ability to turn that around is so important. And we don't always, I know I'm going completely off. Y'all know I'm a little bit of chatty Cathy, but we don't always take the time to think about that pre-meeting. Like how you bring people in on the conversation actually does matter. Anyway, we can talk about that more. Are there other questions, or should I can go out?
Yeah, you got a good question. You got a good Q&A in the question. You want me to read it to you? From Sean Dawson. How do you help diverse organizations with diverse goals and agendas find intersection instead of competition to partner together? It seems we get a lot of lip service, but difficult practical movement. At the end of the day, they each still have to sustain their ability to exist as well. Thoughts? Ooh, she loves this question. Okay.
Ooh, come on now. I love that. And that's a part of, so that early part of the conversation, the skill set of appreciative inquiry and then mirroring back to folks is super important. So not everybody has to, so y'all are all in different lanes, right? Each of the organizations in your system care are different lanes. Some of them are slightly overlapping, but they're also mutually, they should all be rocking in the same direction. I think, first of all, your ability to define the lane for each group is really important. So everybody knows who's on first, who's on second, who's on third. We're providing that service. You're doing this, right? That kind of clarity is important, especially for in the non-profit space or for sometimes intergovernmental space, because right. As long as those lanes are clear, what you can do is say within your lane, max it out, whatever it is. If you are in the funding stream, max that out. If you are in the mental health, max it out. If you are in the child and family service, max it out. If you are in the organization, max it out. That's all we're asking you to do. But at the top of this, we have to have a strong statement of we. So when I did at the top of there, where I asked those appreciative inquiry questions, and I rolled that into a bigger statement, that's the bigger statement. We're all moving in the same direction, but what's the end of the road here for all of us? The end of the road is that we have a community where we don't have the same kinds of disparities, challenges, equity issues, right? That maybe other folks across the country are struggling with. But making sure you got those lanes very clear, right? And that can sometimes be the challenge, but negotiate that up front. Once you get that clear and we're all in that, then max it out. That's all we're asking you to do. Max it out. Whatever you can do that, right? Yeah. Other questions?
Love it. Lots of quotes, lots of people giving shout outs in the chat. We have one person who has their hand raised. Suki, what's your question?
Hey, it's related to what you were just talking about, Dr. T. And I know many of our system of care partners are working in or either representing local level or state level government agencies. And so many of those folks may feel like, in terms of being a messenger, that they're already, working from behind or trying to kind of dig themselves out of a hole because of things that their agency has done either currently or in the past, but they're really working hard and they're really trying to make a difference in people's lives, either through partnership with other local agencies or directly with families and young people themselves. And I'm wondering, kind of thinking about those folks out there that are representing government specifically, do you have any tips or strategies around kind of working from maybe where you're already kind of have a lot of negative perceptions of even just the agency that you work in, and you're trying to build partnerships out in the community?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because in the case made, we often work with partners at the local level who often come to us and say, listen, we I'm laughing, but the way that they phrase it to us is, my job is just like show up every day and have people just yell at me. Like that's literally what I do. I show up and then people yell at me about all the things we're not doing. We're not doing it right. We could have done it better. We can't solve all these problems, but they assume that we can. And then basically I show up and get yelled at all day. How can I stop this? Like, this is not productive for my team. It's not productive for me. It's that right. So I think there are a lot of things, and that's why I was talking about that trust walk. Number one, really for government agencies, do everything you can, right, to be thoughtful in terms of that trust walk. Whatever you got, like give it the full give it like whatever your capabilities are to have that trust walk is really important. And a part of that is the listening exercise. Make sure you understand what people are asking or needing from you. Be very clear about telling the truth, what you can do and what you can't. This is I work for this agency. Here's the resources that we have. That's all we got. But here's what I can do, and here's that sort of sober assessment of what we got is super important. And then we often work with folks at the case may just helping people to understand how to pivot, right? Sometimes people just need you to listen. I tell folks all the time when you have community meetings, sometimes people are just challenged by a whole range of issues and they show up literally just to have somebody listen to them talk about all the challenges that are happening for them. There's a little bit of grace you got to give folks to be able to do that. And then you got to be able to artfully and skillfully sort of pivot, right? I heard all of that. Yep, I get it. I totally get it. And you know what I agree with about what you just said? So this is the way you would play this out. You know what I agree with what you just said? I just think that, there are a lot of folks in this community that are having some of those same issues. I totally agree with that. And I also believe that we could be doing more to do X, Y, and Z. And again, my agency can't solve all of that, but here's what we can do. And I want to partner with you in every possible way to make sure that we're bringing those resources to do as much as we can in that way. Right. So that's a way to like take that sort of negative energy, right? You take it, you agree with something in there, right? That is something that you can agree with, honestly. Like, I agree that this is an issue and this is what I can do. And now turn that back around. And that's why, right, I want to partner with you on that particular thing. The other thing I want to say, and I want to say this, and I want to say this very skillfully at the last part of this is, I don't know that government agencies, right, are always the best messengers on these issues, and don't feel like you always have to be the messenger. And I want to say that because oftentimes people will say, having the government or this agency tell me we need more of this or more of that, right, feels self-serving. So for example, we were doing a set of workshops in Virginia in the housing department, and they were saying, having the housing department tell me we need more money for housing or we need more houses is like Ronald McDonald telling me we need more money for, eat more hamburgers. Like, you got a vested interest. Like, you just like, I can't I don't hear it the same way. So what I would say to you is, you may not be the best messenger on those things. And so what that means is your relationship to community partners in your system of care who can be the stronger messenger on those issues is really important. You can be feeding them all kinds of information. You can be working with them to get things out the door. You can be a strong thought partner with them, but being able to reflect some of that onto the folks in your system of care may sometimes be a better way to do that. And I would say about that is, that's the whole, to my mind, that's a part of the reason why you have a system of care. Like, everybody's got their own lane. Not everybody's going to be in the lane, right? That is the strongest messenger on some of the issues y'all are talking about. So what's my lane? No, I'm not the messenger, but I can certainly make sure that we have right resources for messengers. I can make sure that they get heard. I can make sure that we're feeding them data and information. And some of the organizations I've worked in the past, we were just like, we would put out so much data. Here's all the data you need to go make that case. Have at it. We're going to support you in every possible way. But we knew we could not be, right, the formal messengers on that. So yeah, totally get that.
Lots of head nods, and I see on the videos and in the chats, people are putting hearts and saying they appreciate you saying that, Dr. T. While folks are writing their final questions to Dr. T, we're going to launch a poll. We'd love to hear from you all what you all would like, what other opportunities around strategic communications within the systems of care that you'd like to be a part of. With Dr. T and the case made in Intact, are you interested? Yes, maybe. I think it's going to be a lot of yeses. I'm not trying to skew the data, but I'm seeing the results come in, and overwhelmingly, people are saying they're very interested and would like to learn more. For the folks who are saying yes, they'd like to learn more, anybody interested or want to tell us specifically what you like to hear more about and how you like to receive this type of information? You can either put in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you. Overwhelmingly, yes, Dr. T. Overwhelmingly.
Love it. I love it.
Anyone like to share what you like to hear more, learn more about? Are there specific things happening in your community? Examples of reframing the data. Someone's asked for that.
I love that. Love that.
Love that. Okay, we're going to put that on the list. Anything else? Feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. We'd love to hear from you. Partnership. Ebony. Hey, Ebony, what'd you like to share?
Good afternoon. I'm sorry, my connection has been a little wonky, so please let me know if you can't hear me clearly.
We can hear you. So
okay, great.
To ask your question, yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. T. And my question is, I am a current MSW student, and I'm interested in community practice. And so much of your presentation has aligned with not only what I'm learning from a social work perspective, but just kind of how I see myself engaging in community work. as a social worker, specifically with families and communities surrounding mental health and the intersection of suicide and faith. And so I was just wondering if you had any insights or anything you would have to offer to individuals such as myself who are looking to get into community practice regarding that particular aspect of it. And thank you.
Yeah. And Ebony, when you say that particular aspect, is it in the aspect of social work or in faith, or tell me say that again about the specific connection.
Yes, ma'am. With communities and families with mental health, but mental health that intersects with suicide prevention, and then also the faith aspect component of mental health within suicide and faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's what I love about your question, and I think what you're getting at is I love the fact that your question is intersectional, right? In the sense that you've got multiple things coming together. Because one of the challenges I think of that we've had, right, solving a whole series of issues in our country and our communities, et cetera, is that everybody's trying to solve these issues, right, separately. The mental health care folks are over there, the transportation folks are over here, the housing folks are over there, the health professionals are here. And it's not the way that challenges or community issues show up. They show up in combination, right? And so if we really want to solve some of these issues, we've got to be working in alignment. And that's a part of what a system of care is meant to do, to say, listen, you're not isolated over here as part of the solving mental health issues. You're not isolated over here in terms of housing issues. Those things are probably pretty related, right? What can we do working together to help really address this issue at the intersections at which it exists? So when I think about thinking about, the communities of care, thinking about mental health issues, and you bringing faith leaders into it, you're asking this question about the intersection of that. How can we meet challenges and opportunities where they exist in that way, and then solve them directly? So my first thing is, I think that's exactly right, system of care, right? The collaboration that comes at that, and every community sort of addresses that differently. And you all probably know this better than I do, but in every community, it depends on what are the organizations that choose to come and be part of it and have a strong presence right at the table in that system of care. You get more folks in that space, right? You get to be able to do that. So I love that you're asking that question and sort of bringing folks together in that way. And that's also part of the challenge. I think one of the first questions somebody asked was, yeah, but we got all these organizations, everybody's fighting for resources. How do you make them play nice in the sandbox when they're all kind of coming together saying, no, it's housing, no, it's this, no, it's that. So I would say that, in answer to your question, like any thoughts about how you do this, I would say really lean into the system of care that you're a part of, and really and think about who are the folks who are at the table, but also who are the folks who are missing. How do we bring more of those folks to the table to co-produce the outcomes that we need for this community, right? If you stay focused on like what are the outcomes that we want to co-produce today and in the future, I think you get all kinds of ideas for how to do that right now may not even exist, except for the fact that y'all have come together to sort of figure that out. So if that's helpful, I hope that's helpful in terms of helping you think about that. But yeah, I mean, to your point, being a bridge builder is exactly right. That's exactly what you got to do. Yeah. In every
People are
space, in every community, in every meeting, right? How can I bring together people who don't talk to each other, who don't, who may not even know that the issues are the same? Let me help them figure out that they need each other to exist. Yeah.
And people are saying similar things in the chat. They are interested in learning more about building strong, inclusive advisory boards.
Yeah.
What does that look like to run efficient meetings and collaborating with folks just across the table? So people are saying that in the chat that that's what they're interested in learning more about.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one more question. I see Gail has her hand raised. Gail.
Yes, it's just a statement adding on. I apologize for being late, but I have a program in my community with Black captains in the community. And across the table, I have collaborated with the health department, and I have trainings for NORCAN for hepatitis prevention. I've also connected with Temple University Trauma, and we're doing bloodshot wound first aid. We're doing CPR hands on. Um, and I have in my curriculum of this year program is called Crusades to Save a Life trainings. And I'm hoping to collaborate with the suicide, someone in mental health, someone that can help deliver the 8 dimensions of health and wellness to the community. I have also a program. I have a program which we help them do the wills, final wishes. And in that, I collaborate with the community legal services. And if they are able or eligible, they'll do it for them. They'll get a digital will. So I'm looking for partnership. It's just something that was laid on my heart to do. I launched it the beginning of the year. It's been going well. I just can't seem to get all the classes, my whole curriculum out. I'm doing like a month here, a month there, a month there.
So I think I would say I think that's right. I think what you're describing is probably the same inclination that a lot of folks on this call have about being bridge builders and weavers, right? You see a need in that community and you said, I don't know who else is supposed to be doing this work, but I need to do it. And I need let's say I need other collaborators. I need other folks, right? Other partners to be able to do this. I think the folks in the system of care, right, in that community should be able to help you, or at least to support some of getting the information out, right, that you're sharing about what resources are available. So I would encourage you to connect in that particular way. And if there's not a table already convened in your community that is a system of care, then maybe convene an informal one, right, with organizations who are already also providing some of those kinds of services in your community, and we can maybe talk offline about how to best do that.
I love it. Thank you so much. Again,
I
y'all,
appreciate that.
thank you for your question, Gail. Appreciate you. And thank you for everyone that's here with us today. Can we put some more hearts in the chat for Dr. T and her team? Samara has been active on the keyboard. Let's put some more hearts and thank yous for this learning opportunity today and for the space. We appreciate everyone being here. As a reminder, that guidebook is available for those interested in no-cost CEUs for this session. Please complete the post survey. Once you finish the post survey, you'll be redirected to a CEU request form that you can fill out and request that CEU. Thank you. I just can't say thank you enough. Thank you so much. And this is not goodbye. Y'all, this is not goodbye. You've already said overwhelmingly that you want more. You want to hear more from Dr. T. So this is not goodbye. It's just see you later. So until next time, we will see you later. Y'all take good care, okay? Bye.
Thanks so much for joining today.